Welcome to the 700 Club. President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke for the first time in a month yesterday. Their main dispute remains Israel's plan to attack the last terrorist stronghold in Gaza.
Well, as a result of that call, a team of Israeli officials is coming to Washington to discuss alternatives to a military operation against Rafah. CBN's Chris Mitchell reports.
Israel's prime minister says he had a long phone call with U.S. President Joe Biden about the Jewish nation's main goals in Gaza.
The elimination of Hamas, the release of all our hostages, and the promise that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel.
He's agreed to send a team to Washington to discuss major disagreements, like the Biden administration's position that Israel shouldn't invade Rafah, Hamas's last major stronghold.
Our position is that Hamas should not be allowed a safe haven in Rafah or anywhere else, but a major ground operation there would be a mistake.
Netanyahu insists Hamas will continue to be a major threat if Israel is not allowed to attack the remaining terrorist elements in Rafah. Still, the Biden administration asserts it's on board with Israel's goals, even if it appears opposing an attack on Rafah undermines those goals.
The president emphasized his bone-deep commitment to ensuring the long-term security of Israel.
The United Nations World Food Program says if the fighting doesn't halt in Gaza, nearly half of its 2 million people could starve to death.
There are about 1.1 million people in catastrophic level of hunger.
The food agency asserts if it can't get 300 trucks of aid into Gaza every day, the famine could spread all across the Gaza Strip. Israel says it's not stopping the aid trucks, but the UN fails to distribute much of the food, and trucks are often hijacked or looted by Hamas and criminal gangs. The Israeli government said its troops killed some 20 terrorists and arrested 200 more in a major hospital that Hamas tried to take back control.
Every single hospital that we've searched has been used by Hamas as a weapon of war.
The army also killed a top Hamas commander who was armed and hiding in the Shifa hospital. This morning, the White House also announced Secretary of State Blinken will visit Saudi Arabia and Egypt in coming days in an effort to broker a hostage deal and cease fire. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, I hope our government continues to put the pressure on Hamas, not on Israel. What Hamas is doing is absolutely horrific, and it didn't stop on October 7th. To use a hospital as a base of operations for a military campaign under international law, that's a war crime. To use civilians, whether it's their homes or mosques or schools or synagogues or churches as some kind of shelter, again, that's a war crime. To take hostages and keep them, civilian hostages and keep them, that's a war crime. In all this discussion of war crimes, let us keep the attention on where it really belongs. Hamas is the one that started this. Until they surrender unconditionally, until they turn all the hostages over, lay down their arms, there will be no peace. Hamas has to cease. It can't go forward. Israel can't live with Hamas in charge of Gaza. They have vowed repeatedly to wipe Israel off the map. It was in their founding charter. They're part of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're ideologues to the core, and they have vowed to repeat October 7 again and again and again. Israel can't have that. I would say America can't have that either. World peace is at stake. Hamas has to stop. That's where the pressure needs to be put to bear. Well, in other news, and this is not being reported widely, the Border Patrol arrested a Hezbollah terrorist on our southern border earlier this month. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. Border Patrol agents stopped the 22-year-old Lebanese man upon entering the United States illegally on March 9th near the border town of El Paso, Texas. Basil Abadi told officials that he trained with Hezbollah for 7 years to carry out jihad. When asked why he came to the U.S., he replied, quote, "I'm going to try to make a bomb," and named New York as his destination. Abadi later told investigators that he's been trying to escape Lebanon and Hezbollah because he does not want to kill people. The incident highlights concerns over the crisis at the southern border. BCP reports the number of encounters with individuals on the terror watch list jumped from 98 in 2022 to 172 last year in 2023. Well, here in the nation's capital, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments Monday in a major case challenging the strength of the First Amendment in the internet age. At issue is how far the government can go in encouraging social media companies to regulate misinformation in user posts. CBN White House correspondent Abigail Robertson has more.
Justices appeared skeptical of claims that the Biden administration went too far in encouraging social media companies to moderate controversial content. They specifically addressed topics related to COVID-19 and election security.
Some might say that the government actually has a duty to take steps to protect the citizens of this country, and you seem to be suggesting that that duty cannot manifest itself in the government encouraging or even pressuring platforms to take down harmful information.
Attorneys general from Louisiana and Missouri joined 5 individuals in suing the Biden administration for violating their First Amendment free speech rights. They claim the federal government coerced social media platforms to suppress conservative voices by taking down posts deemed misleading.
Pressuring platforms in back rooms, shielded from public view, is not using the bully pulpit at all. That's just being a bully.
While lower courts sided with the states, the justices seem to favor the Biden administration.
I'm actually inaccurate about something the troops are doing, U.S. troops are doing, and they're, you should take that down. It's factually inaccurate. It's harming the war effort. It's not accurate.
Brad Jacob from Regent University says the heart of this case depends on whether or not the federal government took part in coercion.
But I think that's really the whole issue. Was this just a gentle, hey, we'd like you to kind of encouragement, or was this, you better do this or you're going to be in trouble, with maybe implicit sanctions? How much did the government push is really the issue.
He adds another key is that social media companies are privately owned and operated.
My guess is that the court is going to largely position itself as saying social media is private business. It doesn't have to respect the First Amendment. If you don't like the way Twitter, X moderates your speech, then don't use that platform.
The Biden administration argues they do not use coercive threats to control platforms' editorial content. There's also been no punishment if or when the companies decline to moderate flagged content. A ruling is expected in June. Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Abby. Well, now to the controversy over transgender medicine in minors. Here in America, states are battling over the issue of restricting gender transition medicine and procedures for kids. Now, from the United Kingdom comes a major decision. The National Health Service will no longer prescribe puberty-blocking drugs for children. CBN News' Charlene Aaron reports on the impact it could have here in the United States.
The UK decision banning puberty blockers for children followed an independent review, citing safety concerns and limited research on long-term effects. The National Health Service concluded there is not enough evidence to support the safety or clinical effectiveness of puberty-suppressing hormones to make the treatment routinely available at this time. Former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss applauding the ban.
I'm delighted that the health service is now saying that no under 18s can be prescribed these drugs.
Here in the U.S., a recent study shows nearly 20% of all people identifying as transgender are aged 13 to 17. That's close to 300,000. The number of kids known to be on puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones has more than doubled in 4 years, from close to 2,400 in 2017 to more than 5,000 in 2021. Sarah Parshall-Perry of the Heritage Foundation blames gender ideology for fueling the rise.
We're seeing this increase because young people are vulnerable to the impacts of peer pressure, social media, cultural elites, and again, what they are hearing from their commander-in-chief and the individuals in positions of power in this country.
Effects are linked to poor mental health among children struggling with gender confusion. Research also found that 34% of trans youth have experienced a decline in mental health while taking the drugs. Physicians say major concerns include risk of sterility, lifelong dependence on medication, and anguish of regret. Nathaniel Blake of the Ethics and Public Policy Center.
They are experimenting on children with no real understanding of what they're doing. With regard to sterility, that is a real problem, and that is inevitable for some of these treatment pathways.
More than 20 Republican-led states have adopted laws restricting medical intervention for children with gender dysphoria.
We've seen many of these bans enacted at the state level, 23 bans for procedures, cross-sex hormones, and puberty blockers for minors under the age of 18. My hope now is that this will encourage more states to pass bans for these procedures under the age of 18 in their states.
Back in Europe, more countries such as Norway, Finland, and Sweden are following the UK's lead. And Blake is hoping that trend soon includes the U.S.
I think it will happen. I don't think that it will be quite the same as in the UK, but I think all it may take will be one or two big lawsuits winning. And if there are major damages awarded to some of the people who have been hurt by gender transition, that might break the industry, which has simply been able to profit off of injuring people and has not yet been held accountable for that.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thank you, Charlene. Gordon, back over to you.
Well, it's wonderful to hear that medical science is stepping up to common sense to say, no, we don't have enough information here. And the UK study is a peer-reviewed study showing that this could actually harm teenagers. It's wonderful. I hope it spreads across the nation. It's like we have this, we've lost all common sense on this issue. We need to protect our children. I don't want to wait for some massive lawsuit. When you see this kind of damage coming, let's stop it and say no. If you're an adult, you're 18 and over, and you want to make your own decision, great. But if you're a minor, no, we shouldn't be inflicting this kind of harm on you. The label Christian nationalism is often heard in media and political circles, and this election year, you're going to hear a lot about this. Depending on the source, attempts to define the term paint it as more ominous than ever before. Well, CBN's chief political analyst David Brody brings us the story.
Since Donald Trump's entry into politics began with a ride down the Trump Tower escalator almost 9 years ago, the presidential candidate spoke directly to evangelical Christians, and many responded in kind. In 2024, not much has changed.
We have to bring back our religion. We have to bring back Christianity in this country.
Unfortunately, some who made their way inside the Capitol on January 6th echoed some of that same spirit.
Let's all say a prayer.
In the aftermath of those events, many news organizations took a closer look, resulting in stories such as the growing danger of Christian nationalism that's rooted in political power and even violence. Georgetown professor Paul Miller wrote the book, What's Wrong with Christian Nationalism?
There's a kind of nationalism that uses Christian language and symbols and rhetoric to advance its agenda. And it's bad. I think Christian nationalism is real.
But what is being included under the umbrella term Christian nationalism? And how widespread is it really? A new Public Religion Research Institute poll shows roughly 3 in 10 Americans qualify as Christian nationalist adherents or sympathizers. But in that specific survey, the criteria cites someone as a Christian nationalist if they believe the following: that the government should declare America a Christian nation, laws should be based on Christian values, that we will not have a country anymore if America moves away from our Christian foundations, being Christian is an important part of being truly American, and that God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. Well, that grouping could potentially include millions of Bible-believing, church-going Christians who don't view many or some of those concepts as radical at all. Russ Vought is the president of the Center for Renewing America, an organization devoted to restoring and promoting Judeo-Christian principles.
Their definition of Christian nationalism is something that obviously we reject. I mean, they're putting this in a bucket that is un-American. We're not talking about theocracy.
A recent Politico article painted Vote and the group as an organization developing plans to infuse Christian nationalist ideas in a new Trump administration. Vote sees that as a scare tactic.
We're a think tank. We have a policy bent towards us. We have goals that are 1 year, 5 year, 25, 50-year aims. And I would put Christian nationalism and really the desire for Christian nationalism in that bucket.
Vote says it's about preserving a Judeo-Christian heritage through sound public policy decisions.
I do believe that America has been, should be, and I hope it to be someday a Christian nation that affords religious liberty to everyone.
Miller and others see it differently. They feel Christian nationalists are more about pursuing special rights for Christians and not religious liberty at all.
A good litmus test here is, do you support the same freedoms and rights for non-Christians?
In one statistical litmus test, Pew Research shows that less than 1% of white evangelical Protestants actually believe Christians should get special rights. And of those who believe that the U.S. should be a Christian nation, only 24% think the federal government should advocate Christian religious values. About twice as many, 52%, believe the government should advocate for moral values that are shared by people of many faiths. Meanwhile, others have used the Christian nationalist label for those who hold the following view.
They believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God.
While those remarks receive criticism from conservative evangelicals, Professor Miller believes it comes down to a question of where does American identity come from? Universal values or Christian ones?
If you think that, we should privilege the Judeo-Christian template in the public square, that's Christian nationalism. Are you out to advocate for Christian principles or Christian power?
Russ Vogt says what this is truly about is politics and creating a narrative that anything labeled as Christian nationalism is dangerous, with the goal of keeping conservative Bible-believing Christians out of the public square and public policy.
The continental divide between right and left is about God. Do you believe that God is the measure of all things, or do you believe that man is the measure of all things? And that really, if you kind of understand that fundamental, it's going to help interpret where you see people fall not only on this debate, but on a host of public policy debates.
David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Watch out for this term, because I think this is going to be used as a wedge term to drive politics. I've said for years that if you are an evangelical, you're a Protestant who believes in life, you're pro-life, and you're a qualified lawyer, there's no way you'll make it through the U.S. Senate to get on the Supreme Court. And the history backs me up on this. It seems to be, regardless if you're white or black, if you're evangelical Protestant, and heaven forbid you're charismatic, then you can't make it through a Senate confirmation hearing. John Ashcroft is a notable exception. He made it to Attorney General. But you look at it's obvious discrimination. And there's fear-mongering here that somehow or other we're trying to Christians are trying to turn America into a theocracy. Nothing could be further from the truth. I know the history. I know what the Founding Fathers went through. And they had very much Oliver Cromwell on their mind when they were creating the Constitution. If you don't know English history, it was a Puritan movement to take over the government and get rid of the king. And it absolutely failed because Cromwell became another king. It didn't work. Theocracies don't work. I believe in a secular, democratic republic. Democracies can become unhinged. Republics always turn into aristocracy. Aristocracy, monarchy, and no way to govern. But you have these checks and balances, and it's all designed for liberty. that you have freedom of religion, you have freedom of speech, you have freedom of conscience. There isn't any religious test for public office in our country. We need to stand up for these ideas. And in standing up, recognize and call it for what it is, that it's religious discrimination. You are trying to paint an entire group of Americans as somehow unfit for office or unfit for the public square. Please be aware of this. That's the agenda. That's what's trying to happen. Now, at the end of the day, I'm a Christian. I believe that if a culture, if a society comes together and says, can we observe these two rules? Can we love God with all our heart, everything within us, can we love him? And can we love our neighbor as ourselves? That if we truly followed that, we would have a wonderful society. You'd have a wonderful neighborhood. You'd have a wonderful country. It would be wonderful to do that. Can you force that? Absolutely not. Can you legislate that? I don't think you can legislate love. But if you convince people, if you keep preaching, this is a good way to go, this is a good way to have life and have it more abundantly, well, then you'll have great success. And that's what has built America. It's not forced on anyone. You have the right to choose. And I hope that we as Americans will choose to do life and life more abundantly. Well, the Tennessee Volunteers are heading into the NCAA tournament as the #2 seed. Well, recently, Coach Rick Barnes told CBN's Will Dawson about his long road to the top and the most important lesson he's learned along the way.
Tennessee Volunteers head coach Rick Barnes is a finalist for the NCAA Basketball Hall of Fame. In his nearly 50 years as a coach, Barnes has led his teams to 8 Sweet 16s, 3 Elite Eights, a Final Four, and in 2019 was named National Coach of the Year. His love for the game began in the small town of Hickory, North Carolina.
I remember walking in the Kenworth Elementary School gym one day. All I had on was a pair of cut-off shorts. I was barefooted, didn't have a shirt on. And the superintendent, he tossed the ball, he said, shoot it. And I know that's the first time I ever shot a basketball. But as I really got to the 8th grade is when I just forgot about all the other sports and started concentrating on basketball.
What made you want to get into coaching?
It started with those teachers in the 8th grade because they were all coaches. And I knew at that point in time that I wanted to do what they did. I wanted to be able to impact young people. But those are the real reasons I think that God led me into the coaching.
God was important to Barnes. As a teenager, he made a profession of faith.
9th, 10th grade, I was listening to a Billy Graham crusade. And I remember vividly getting on my knees in front of the TV and asking Jesus to truly, become a part of my life.
Barnes coached at George Mason, Providence, and Clemson. Then in 1998, he became the head coach of the Texas Longhorns. In 2003, he led the team to their first Final Four in nearly 60 years. Professionally, he was on top. Personally, his relationships had become strained.
Pride, jealousy, coveting, you name it. I wasn't the husband I should be. I wasn't the father I should be. I wasn't the coach I should be because I started making it about me.
In 2006, his teenage daughter and son gave him some tough love.
She said, if you died today, you would go to hell. And I got upset and left and got my car, drove up to the top of the hill, pulled over the side of the road and started crying. And when I looked at my daughter and the way she said it to me in a really loving way, it wasn't like she was, she just said, we want you to spend eternity with us. And today you wouldn't. And she was right. I look back on it now knowing that even during those times that maybe when things were going well in life in terms of maybe winning basketball games or success or making money, whatever it may be, even at the low times when I knew deep down inside there was something empty there that I was missing, and what made me chase the wrong things, I can't tell you other than the fact that it was selfish, all self-induced. I know that God had me. That's what I had gotten away from. I'd lost my daily personal relationship with him. But when he has been at the center of my life, that's when I've been my most happiest. That's when I know that I'm most secure. That's when I know that that he has never left me.
Texas experienced unprecedented success in 17 seasons under Coach Barnes. However, in 2015, he was fired after failing to reach the second round of the NCAA tournament. Turns out it was a blessing in disguise, as in that same year, he became the head coach of the Tennessee Volunteers.
When I came here, I wanted them to say there's something different about Coach. I wanted them to say that, not that he's gotten softer as a coach, but, you know, what is it that's different? I wanted them to ask me that question. I want it to be the fact that Jesus Christ is the center of my life. And so I wanted our program to be a model program in terms of truly not making the mistakes that I'd made in previous jobs. I want it to be a place where it was truly like a family.
As the NCAA tournament tips off this week, Coach Barnes has a top-ranked Tennessee program with dreams of winning it all. However, he's coaching knowing that whatever happens, God is still in control. You've had some good teams over the years, and at Tennessee just haven't been able to get to the Final Four. This year, it seems like maybe you're built that way. You've got a defensive mentality, and you've got a scorer like Dalton Connect. What would it mean for you to get this program to the Final Four?
This is a special place. The fact is, being able to be the last team standing would be I guess you could say a dream come true, or be a culmination of a lot of hard work. That's what we're chasing, like every team in the country, and if it's God's will, hopefully, I'd love to see it happen.
Now, victory is never guaranteed, but when you have that kind of coach, when you have a coach that says, we're going to be family, I'm going to pour into you, I'm going to shape you and shape you for your future, well, then you have a victory that is not ever recognized on a court or a field of play. You have a victory for a lifetime. When coaches do that, when they willingly share of themselves and give and keep on giving to their players, it's wonderful. And as a result, you have success on the court too. There's no guarantee of victory from it, but it makes the game a whole lot better.
Welcome back to Washington for the CBN News Break. Congress is working to avoid a government shutdown Friday. The Washington Post reports the White House and Congress have agreed on spending for the rest of the fiscal year, but lawmakers might not be able to pass all the bills in time. If they miss the Friday deadline, they'll still have the weekend to pass the bills before most federal programs are affected. Well, spring arrives today, this year beginning about a day earlier, officially starting later tonight. In many states, it feels like spring has already arrived. It's been the warmest winter on record for the lower 48, with flowers blooming and plants already sprouting in some areas, including right here in Washington, D.C., where the cherry blossoms are already in peak bloom 2 weeks early. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.
Leaders pray first. That's something Ryan Skoog has learned firsthand. He and his co-authors spent 3 years traveling across 6 continents and meeting with top leaders around the globe. They discovered the #1 factor driving radical transformation: extraordinary prayer.
Author Ryan Skoog says the secret behind extraordinary leaders is prayer. Yet oftentimes, many leaders neglect this practice, which can have disastrous results in their personal life and their organization. In Lead with Prayer, Ryan reveals prayer habits of world-changing leaders and how to build a culture of prayer wherever you lead.
Well, it's a fascinating book. Ryan Skoog is here with us now, and we welcome you to the program. It's great to have you here.
So honored to be here.
Oh, the spiritual habits of world-changing leaders. There are lots of leaders, but not all leaders are world-changing. In fact, you say that leaders have a prayer problem.
Yeah, there's a major foundation in America that did a 6-figure study on the prayer habits of leaders in America, and the results were so disconcerting that they never published the study.
Wow.
The person who founded it said, this is one of the most disappointing studies I've ever read. And so we set out on a journey to say, we know there are praying leaders around here. And in fact, where we found incredible praying leaders was the global church. Yeah, see, the global church is exploding in a way that we've never seen. In fact, missiologists say they've never seen the numbers coming to Christ that are happening right now. And we started trying to unpack, why is that? And instead of finding a leadership principle, we found it was a prayer life that was fueling this incredible explosive growth around the globe. And so that's set us out on a journey saying, we want to learn how leaders pray.
There's a poignant anecdote in your book about your dad who had a startup business of his own and you know, really poured himself into it for a decade. And then he had a Fortune 500 company offer to buy it for like a big sum. Prayer changed his answer to that.
Yeah, it was one of those moments that every entrepreneur dreamed of. And he went to pray, and the Lord said, don't do it. And he obeyed. And 6 months later, that company declared bankruptcy and would have taken him down.
Wow.
And 10 years of work would have been lost. And 10 years of work was saved by 1 hour of prayer. Yeah. And so truly the idea of saying, is it worth it, prayer versus productivity? It's always worth it.
Well, and you talk about, you know, you just mentioned 1 hour of prayer. When you talk about praying, I mean, there's practicing the presence of God. He's with us all day, all the time, always available. But there's a deeper kind of prayer that you're talking about in here.
Yeah, as we started interviewing leaders around the world, we found something amazing, and that's that most of their prayer lives looked similar. They looked a lot like each other. Someone in a refugee camp in the middle of a difficult country, and a New York financier, any leader that was intense about their prayer life, from Francis Chan to Mother Teresa, their prayer lives looked similar. And the thing that they all had in common was it was friendship first. It wasn't based on just going through and praying through lists and all these things. It was spending time, abiding in Jesus, and carving that out, scheduling it, crafting a day with God.
And really understanding what abiding means. Sometimes being quiet, just enjoying being with him.
Absolutely.
In the world today, that's a very hard thing to do because everything's rushing and pushing, and maybe that's the enemy's greatest ploy to keep us from the kind of prayer you're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, the first interview we did was with someone named Rosabelle, who'd served for decades in a war zone. And I asked her about her prayer life. She goes, oh, I just love Jesus. She just glowed. And she said, when I was 18, I had no money, but I wanted to tithe. And so I figured the only currency I had was my time. So I started praying 2.5 hours a day, and I've been doing that the last 30 years. That was the beginning of our journey in learning how to pray from extraordinary leaders.
Talk about the 2 training grounds for praying leaders that you discuss in the book.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, the first one is to sit at the feet of Jesus and to learn to pray like Jesus. And then the second one is to really learn, it's more caught than taught, is to really learn from the stories of leaders who have wrestled in prayer and who have crafted their day to be with God, and what their evening habits and their morning habits, and what does it look like through the afternoon, to really craft a day with God. And those are it's been beautiful to realize that you don't just read, but you need to practice prayer and practice some of these habits. And all of these habits that we saw from these leaders around the world, we made each one of the ones that we saw a chapter, and have a tool at the end of the book to be able to teach people to practice these habits.
I love the way that you laid it out. I couldn't stop reading the book. It was so fascinating. And you talk about leading with prayer, and you talk a lot about leaders, but shouldn't we all pray like this?
Absolutely. Jesus said, if you abide in me, that's where the fruit is. And if we're not seeing fruit, it might be because we're not learning the secret of abiding.
You had a situation with your daughter while you were going through a situation with your family, and then your daughter began having these awful graphic nightmares. How did prayer change what was going on then?
Well, it was during COVID, and it was a difficult time in our family, and my daughter started having nightmare after nightmare every single night. And they were horrible. We rescue girls from trafficking in our nonprofit. And she said they're demonic dreams where the demons would come and say, we're going to torture the girls in Nepal and you can't stop us. And she would wake up even puking sometimes. They were so intense. And she'd wake up morning after morning saying, Daddy, make them stop. Make them stop. And so I spent night after night getting used to the smell of my carpet, laying on my face in front of her door, crying out to God to rescue my daughter. And at the same time, when it was really intense, it was a Monday, and we showed up, and we didn't have payroll for Friday because of COVID and with our business. And that was the most difficult time of my whole life, and I cried like I've never cried in my whole adult life. And I saw a picture of Jesus. And he was crying. And he said, Ryan, you never cried alone. Yeah. And that moment just overwhelmed me with the love of God. And the fact that no one's cried alone, that Jesus has cried with everyone who's ever cried. And that night we had communion, and she was completely set free of these nightmares, and our business was rescued. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that experience with Jesus was so precious. It was worth the challenges that we went through.
We are in a time, it seems, of great spiritual challenge in our country, in the world, but in our country specifically. How do people become praying leaders?
Yeah, well, the first thing to do is to realize it's not something you just go out and run a marathon.
Yeah.
You go out and just run a mile.
It's a lifetime.
And so learning now, starting now, to have those practices and to value it, schedule and craft a day with God. Put it in your schedule and start spending time. I have these prayer cards that I've created, and started just trying different prayers, from confession to the examen to Lectio Divina, learning all these prayer habits from all over the world. Yeah. And we have tools at leadwithprayer.com to help people get started.
Oh, it's so personal. Lead with Prayer, the spiritual habits of world-changing leaders. I tell you, I couldn't put it down, and I think you'll love it as well. It's needed. It's available nationwide. You know, it all begins with each one of us individually. Get a hold of this book. Ryan, thank you.
Thank you
awesome.
So much.
Wonderful to have you here.
So great. I'm just an honor.
Gordon?
The neighbors thought Mrs. Young's son was cursed. A fortune teller believed the child was haunted by ghosts. Well, they were all wrong. The boy had a cleft lip, and his parents had no money for the surgery needed to fix it.
Mrs. Young could hardly wait to give birth to her first child, Kerr. She planned to throw a traditional Chinese blessing banquet for him when he turned a month old. But it never happened because Kerr was born with a cleft lip and palate.
I knew if people saw him, they wouldn't bless him. They'd laugh and say he was a monster.
Mrs. Young had to take care of Kerr herself because her husband works out of town. To protect Kerr, she kept him home a lot and covered him when they went out. Still, someone managed to see him.
She asked me, did you eat rabbit when you were pregnant? And now your baby is cursed by a rabbit? After that, the whole village knew about Kerr's cleft lip.
It was hard for him to eat, and at 6 months he was small, malnourished, and always sick.
I hardly ever saw him smile. The doctor said maybe it was because of the gap in his lip, that his respiratory tract was so susceptible to infection.
A fortune teller said the reason Kerr had problems was because he was haunted by dead people. The man suggested building a small bridge and having the first person to cross it give Kerr a nickname.
I took the advice, and a man gave Kerr the nickname Strong Tiger. All I had to do was call him that, and he'd be healthy.
Instead, Kerr landed in the hospital with pneumonia. After this, the Youngs diligently tried to borrow money for cleft lip surgery, but it cost too much. So Mrs. Young searched online for help and found Operation Blessing. We helped to make Kerr's surgery possible.
When I told my husband the good news on the phone, he was so excited that he cried. Now my son looks good. His life is full of sunshine, and I don't have to hide him anymore.
Kerr recently turned 1, and Mrs. Young was finally able to throw him a party.
Some people hardly recognize him, and they apologized for the things they said. They gave him a lot of blessings, but I know God's are all that matter. Because the Operation Blessing volunteers told me God always loved my baby. So I'm grateful to him, and I thank the Operation Blessing donors for giving Kerr a bright future.
Thank you. That thank you for a bright future goes to you if you're a member of the 700 Club. Just around the world, you see all these superstitions, all this nonsense, and isn't it wonderful to come in and say, we love you, God loves you, we want to help you in your time of need. You can be a part of it. How? By saying, yes, I want to be a member of the 700 Club. How much is that? Well, it's just $20 a month. That's 65 cents a day. You can join at higher levels. We have 700 Club Gold at $40 a month. 1,000 Club, $1,000 a year, and that's $84. And here's what happens with your gift. A portion goes into the work of CBN International to preach the gospel, to preach the good news to people that haven't heard it. We're preaching around the world, over 70 languages. Another portion goes into the work of Operation Blessing to help people around the world, to say, we love you, God loves you. Here, we're here not just to tell you that, but we want to show it to you very tangibly, to give you a hand up, to give you a hope and a future. If you want to be a part of all of it, join with us and call us, 1-800-700-7000. Now, when you call, make sure you ask for Pledge Express, electronic monthly giving, bank doing all the work, and we can send as our gift to you. Power for Life, monthly teaching CDs or downloads, your choice. You can get Pledge Express by calling and saying, I want to join by Pledge Express. You can go to cbn.com. When you give monthly on the internet, you automatically sign up for it. You can also text CBN to 71777. Either way, do it right now and say, yes, I want to be a member.
Well, we love hearing from you, and many of you have sent in email questions, so we want to take some time today to answer them. Gordon, this first one comes from Deborah, who says, how can a person be confident in Scripture with translations and possible revisions made?
Well, you can have confidence in this. All the Scriptures, the entire New Testament agrees on this one fact. Jesus rose from the dead. So let all the controversy about translations and manuscripts and all of that get swallowed up. They all agree on that one fact, and that's the basis of our faith. Now, I adhere to reading it in the original. I like to go back to the original Greek. I like to go back to the original Hebrew. There are these wonderful things now called interlineals where you can get the original word. You don't actually have to study Greek or study Hebrew. It'll study it for you. And it'll give you links to Hebrew and Greek dictionaries where you can see how that particular word is used in all the manuscripts, all the books of the Bible. And it'll enlighten you as to the meaning. Because things do get lost in translation, nuances of meaning. Particularly rhyming words and rhyming thought patterns can get lost. So go back to the original source. And that was the cry of the Renaissance that, well, you know, okay, we have the Latin translation, but what does the Greek original say? What does the Hebrew original say? And from that became a great flowering of Christianity. So if you really want to study, you can find them and they're available online. You can even have apps that on your phone you can read an interlineal Bible. It's wonderful, and it'll solve all the confusion.
This is Gomez, who says, hello, friends. I live and work in the UK. I've got a question about the tithe. Once I receive my salary, do I give the 10% of the gross or the 10% of the net, the remaining amount after tax deductions?
Well, if you want to get legal about it, the tithe is on the increase. And so that's the increase that comes to you. So if you want to get legal with it, tithe on the net after taxes, because that's your increase. Now, some people tithe on the gross because they want to be abundantly cheerful in their giving and very generous in your giving, which the Apostle Paul absolutely approves. So it's your choice. And I encourage people, please don't get legalistic about the tithe. It's not a place for legalism. It's God loves a cheerful giver. And when you are fully in with him, you just can't help but give. It's part of the gospel. For God so loved the world that he gave. When you so love God and his work and you want to see the kingdom of God expand and you want to help people, you want to do all these things, it's on your heart, and you want to give. It's just a natural outreach of it. It's a natural extension of being a Christian, and God loves that. That's what he's looking for. He's looking children who will willingly obey and say, yes, I'm with you. Here's a word from Psalms. Let your unfailing love surround us, Lord, for our hope is in you alone. God bless. We'll see you again tomorrow.